These numbers are wrong.
Dan gleich specialmente.
Do it again and do it right this time.
The office was silent except for the hum of the city 20 floors below. Richard Calloway stood at his mahogany desk, staring at the scattered papers that had been moved from their precise arrangement. His jaw tightened. For 30 years he'd built Calloway Industries from nothing, and control, absolute control, had been his secret. Every document had its place. Every decision flowed through him. And now, someone had touched his things. He turned sharply as the cleaning lady entered, pushing her cart with its familiar squeak. She was older, maybe in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. But Richard didn't see kindness that evening. He saw an intrusion. "Who told you to touch my desk?" His voice cut through the quiet like a blade. The woman stopped, her hand still on the cart handle. And what she said next, quietly, without anger, would change everything Richard thought he knew about power, respect, and what truly mattered in this life. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Richard Calloway hadn't always been the man who yelled at cleaning ladies. 40 years ago, he'd been a kid from South Philadelphia, the son of a factory worker who came home each night with grease under his fingernails and stories about treating everyone with respect. Richard had listened then, nodded along, but somewhere between his first promotion and his corner office, those lessons had gotten buried under spreadsheets and shareholder meetings. He'd married young, Linda, a sweet woman who taught elementary school, and they'd had 2 daughters. But the marriage had ended 15 years back. The girls were grown now, living their own lives in different cities. They called on holidays, kept things polite, but there was distance there that no amount of money could bridge. His office had become his real home. He arrived before sunrise and left after dark, building an empire that employed 3,000 people across 5 states. Calloway Industries manufactured precision parts for medical equipment, important work that saved lives, he told himself. But the truth he wouldn't admit was simpler. Work was where he felt powerful, where he had control, where he mattered. At home, alone in his sterile penthouse, he was just a man eating takeout and watching the news. Here, he was someone. The cleaning crew came every evening at 7. Richard usually worked late enough to see them, but he'd never paid much attention. They were invisible, part of the building's machinery, like the elevator or the air conditioning. He knew there was a woman who did his floor. He'd seen her for years, always with that same squeaky cart, always quiet and efficient. But he'd never learned her name, never really looked at her face. That Tuesday started like any other. He'd spent the morning in back-to-back meetings, the afternoon reviewing contracts, the evening preparing for a presentation to the board. His desk was organized exactly as he liked it. Quarterly reports in the left corner, the Henderson contract in the center, notes for tomorrow's meeting on the right. Every paper had been positioned with care. It was how he thought, how he worked. Chaos on the desk meant chaos in his mind, and Richard Calloway didn't do chaos. He'd stepped out around 6:30 to grab coffee from the executive lounge. When he returned 10 minutes later, everything had changed. The papers were still there, but they'd been moved. The reports were now on the right. The contract was slightly askew. His notes had been shifted to make room for something, probably so the desk could be dusted. His chest tightened with that familiar anger, the kind that came from losing control. Someone had violated his space, disrupted his system. It felt personal, almost like an attack. He was still staring at the desk when he heard the carts squeak. The cleaning lady appeared in his doorway, the same woman who'd been cleaning this floor for as long as he could remember. She wore a simple navy uniform, her silver hair neatly pulled back, and she moved with the careful slowness of someone whose joints didn't work quite like they used to. She gave him a small, polite nod, the kind she probably gave everyone, and started to push her cart past his office. "Wait." Richard's voice was sharp, commanding. She stopped, turned to face him with those calm, patient eyes. "Did you move my papers?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I needed to dust your desk. I was very careful." "I don't care if you were careful," he interrupted, his voice rising. "Those papers are confidential. They're arranged in a specific order. You have no right to touch them." His face flushed with heat. The frustration of the whole day, The difficult clients, the vendor who'd failed to deliver, the accountant's concerning report about third-quarter numbers, all of it came pouring out, aimed at this woman who'd done nothing but try to clean his desk. "I have told maintenance before," he continued, advancing around his desk, "that my office doesn't need cleaning. Just empty the trash and vacuum. That's it. But instead, you people seem to think you can just touch whatever you want, reorganize things, interfere with work that's worth more than—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. The unspoken words hung in the air. Work that's worth more than you could possibly understand. The woman's expression didn't change. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't apologize. She just stood there, one hand resting on her cart, waiting for him to finish. And somehow, that calm patience made him even angrier, made him feel small in a way he couldn't quite name. "I'm sorry I upset you, Mr. Calloway," she said quietly when he finally ran out of steam. Her voice was gentle, with the faint trace of an accent he couldn't place. Maybe Eastern European, maybe Russian. "I will make a note not to dust your desk again. I only wanted to help." Something about the way she said his name made him pause. She knew who he was. Of course she did. His name was on the building. But hearing it from her lips, spoken with such quiet dignity, made him feel exposed somehow. "Just don't touch my things again," he muttered, turning back to his desk, dismissing her the way he'd dismissed 1,000 other people who'd inconvenienced him. He heard the cart squeak as she moved on to the next office. He tried to return to work, to restore his papers to their proper places, but his concentration was broken. He kept hearing her voice in his head, that gentle, "I only wanted to help." Why did it bother him? She'd been in the wrong. She'd overstepped. He had every right to be angry. Still, there was something nagging at him, something that felt uncomfortably like shame. He shook it off. He had a company to run, a board presentation to prepare. The feelings of some cleaning lady weren't his concern. The next morning, Richard arrived at 6 as usual. He rode the elevator up to his floor, nodded to the security guard, and walked to his office. But something was different. On his desk, beside his precisely arranged papers, sat a small ceramic mug with a steaming cup of coffee in it. Next to the mug was a note written in careful, slightly shaky handwriting. "Black, no sugar, like you take it. Have a good day. Vera." His first instinct was suspicion. Who was Vera? How did she know how he took his coffee? Then he realized, the cleaning lady. She must have noticed on one of those late evenings when he'd left his cup on the desk. She'd been paying attention, even when he hadn't. He picked up the mug. It was handmade, slightly uneven, with a blue glaze that reminded him of his mother's old pottery. The coffee was perfect, hot and strong, exactly how he liked it. He sipped it slowly, staring at the note. Vera. After all these years, he finally knew her name. And she'd done this after he'd yelled at her, after he'd been cruel. The shame came back, stronger this time, settling in his chest like a weight. He crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. But he kept the mug, told himself he'd return it later. That evening he stayed late again, part of him hoping to see her, though he wasn't sure why. When she appeared with her cart, he stood up, started to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a thank you. But the words stuck in his throat. She gave him that same small nod, started to move past. "The coffee," he finally managed. "It was—" "Thank you." She stopped, turned back with a gentle smile. "You're welcome, Mr. Calloway. We all need a little kindness sometimes." Then she continued down the hall, leaving him alone with thoughts he didn't want to examine too closely. But the next morning there was another coffee. And the morning after that, each time with a small note, simple messages like, "Hope today is better," or "Remember to eat lunch." He never asked her to do this. He'd never even properly apologized for yelling. Yet she kept bringing him coffee, kept offering these small gestures of care, like she saw something in him worth nurturing. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Friday afternoon, he was in a meeting when his assistant knocked on the conference room door. "Mr. Calloway, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have a visitor." "She says it's urgent," he excused. Himself annoyed at the disruption. In the lobby outside his office stood a young woman, maybe 30, with dark hair and worried eyes. She looked familiar somehow, but he couldn't place her. "Mr. Calloway? I'm Anna Kozlov. I'm Vera's granddaughter." His stomach dropped. "Is something wrong?" "My grandmother collapsed this morning," Anna said, her voice tight with emotion. "She's in the hospital. They think it was a small stroke, but she insisted I come here before I went to see her. She made me promise to bring you something." Anna held out a worn leather journal, its cover soft with age and handling. "She said to give you this. She said you'd understand what to do with it." Richard took the journal, confused and unsettled. "I don't understand." "Why would she talks about you," Anna interrupted gently. "She says you remind her of someone. She says you're a good man who forgot something important." Before he could respond, before he could ask what that meant, Anna was gone, hurrying to be with her grandmother. Richard stood in the empty lobby, holding the journal, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the stress of work. He opened it slowly. The pages were filled with handwriting, Vera's careful script mixing with other hands, some entries in English, some in what looked like Russian. But on the first page, in English, was a single line that made his blood run cold. "For those who forget where they came from, so they might remember who they are." If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Let me know you're there, feeling this with me. Richard closed his office door and sat at his desk, the journal in his hands feeling heavier than its physical weight. He opened it again, more carefully this time, and began to read. The entries started in 1989. September 15th, arrived in Philadelphia today. Everything is strange. The language hurts my throat. Anna is scared. I'm scared, but we're free. That's what matters. He turned the page, found more entries, started to piece together a story he'd never known. Vera Kozlov had come to America 36 years ago with her daughter and infant granddaughter, refugees from the Soviet Union. Her husband had been a professor of literature, a man who'd spoken too openly about government corruption and paid the price. They'd fled with almost nothing, a few clothes, some photographs, and this journal her husband had given her. "Write it down," he told her. "Write down the struggle and the hope, so we never forget the cost of freedom, and so we always remember to help others find theirs." She'd worked 3 cleaning jobs in those early years, learning English word by word, saving every penny. Her daughter had gotten sick, cancer, and the medical bills had taken everything. But Vera had kept working, kept fighting, kept writing in this journal. Richard found entries about her daughter's death, about raising Anna alone, about the small kindnesses strangers had shown her, and the many cruelties she'd endured silently. January 8th, 1995. Manager at the office building shouted at me today for using wrong chemical on floor. I wanted to explain I cannot read the English labels well yet, but he would not listen. Anna has fever again. No money for doctor until Friday. But Mrs. Chen from downstairs brought soup. God sends angels in unexpected forms. He kept reading, pulled deeper into this life he'd never imagined. There were entries about Anna's graduation from high school, her scholarship to community college, her wedding. There were entries about Vera's pride and her loneliness, about how hard it was to grow old in a country that didn't value age the way her homeland had. And then, about 5 years ago, he found his own name. March 12th, started cleaning the 20th floor at Callaway Industries. The CEO works very late. He is alone always. Today he fell asleep at his desk. I put my coat over his shoulders. He didn't wake. He reminds me of my husband before the fear took his kindness. I will pray for him. Richard's hands trembled as he read. She'd been praying for him. For 5 years, this woman he'd never really seen had been praying for him, noticing him, caring about him in a way no one else did. The entries continued, small observations about his life that she saw from the periphery. He never eats the lunch his assistant orders. I think he is sad. No pictures on his desk. Where is his family? He threw a report across the room today. I cleaned up the papers. His hands were shaking. Something is breaking inside him. She saw him. Truly saw him. Not the CEO, not the powerful man who controlled thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. She saw the lonely, angry, frightened person underneath, and instead of judging him, she'd prayed for him. The last entry was from 2 days ago. I will bring him coffee tomorrow. Not because he deserves it. None of us deserve grace. but because that's what love does. It gives when there's no reason to give. It hopes when hope seems foolish. My husband taught me that. Mr. Calloway shouted at me for moving his papers. He was so angry, like the guards at the border when we left. But that anger is just fear wearing a disguise. I'm too old to be afraid of angry men anymore. I know what real danger looks like. This man is not dangerous. He's just lost. Tomorrow I will bring him coffee and let him know someone sees him. Maybe that will be enough to help him find his way back. Richard closed the journal and pressed his palms against his eyes. Shame flooded through him. Not the superficial embarrassment from before, but deep, gut-wrenching shame that made him see himself clearly for the first time in years. He'd yelled at this woman who'd survived things he couldn't imagine, who'd lost everything and rebuilt with grace and dignity, who'd seen his brokenness and responded with kindness. He'd treated her like she was nothing, like she was invisible, like her humanity didn't matter. And she'd brought him coffee. He grabbed his phone, called down to security. I need Vera Kozlov's emergency contact information, now. 10 minutes later, he was in his car, the journal on the passenger seat, driving to Mercy General Hospital. He found Anna in the ICU waiting room, her eyes red from crying. "How is she?" he asked, slightly out of breath from running through the parking garage. Anna looked up, surprised. "They're running more tests. The doctor says the next 24 hours are critical. She's strong, but..." Her voice broke. "She's 73. Her body has been through so much." Richard sat down beside her. This young woman he didn't know, who'd been raised by the woman he'd shouted at. "I read the journal," he said quietly. "Some of it. I didn't know. I didn't know any of her story." "She doesn't tell people," Anna said. "She says the past is for learning, not for sympathy. She hates pity." "This isn't pity," Richard said, and he realized it was true. What he felt was awe and regret, and a desperate need to make something right that he'd broken without ever realizing it was precious. "Can I see her?" Anna hesitated. "She's unconscious right now, but when she wakes up, I think she'd like that. She talks about you like you're..." She paused, searching for words. "Like you're someone worth saving. I never understood it, but she sees something in people. She always has. Have you ever met someone who saw the best in you when you couldn't see it yourself? Has anyone shown you that kind of grace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes we all need to remember we're not alone in this." Richard spent that night in the hospital waiting room. Anna tried to send him home, but he refused. He couldn't explain why he needed to be there, why it suddenly mattered so much that this woman, this stranger who wasn't really a stranger, knew he'd come. Around 3 a.m, a nurse appeared. "Mrs. Kozlov is awake. She's asking for Richard." He stood so quickly his vision blurred. Anna grabbed his arm. 5 minutes. "Don't tire her out." He followed the nurse down the corridor, his heart hammering. The ICU room was dim, filled with the quiet beeping of monitors. Vera lay in the bed, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her, with tubes and wires connecting her to various machines. But her eyes were open and clear, and when she saw him, she smiled. "Mr. Calloway," she whispered. "You came." He pulled a chair close to her bedside, hardly trusting himself to speak. "I read your journal," he managed. "Anna brought it to me. I read about your husband, about everything you went through, about..." His voice cracked. "About how you saw me all this time and I never saw you." "We see what we're ready to see," Vera said gently. Her voice was weak but steady. "You weren't ready before." "I yelled at you," he said, the words thick with shame. "You brought me coffee every morning. You prayed for me. You showed me kindness I never earned, and I yelled at you for moving papers. Papers that don't matter. Nothing in that office matters compared to..." He stopped, overwhelmed. Vera reached out with her free hand, the one without the IV, and touched his wrist. Her skin was cool and papery, but her grip was surprisingly firm. "In my country," she said, "my husband was a professor. Very important man. Everyone respected him. But the government didn't like what he taught, so they made him clean toilets in the metro station. For 2 years, he scrubbed toilets. Educated man, brilliant mind, on his knees with a brush. You know what he told me?" Richard shook his head, unable to speak. He said God was teaching him that no work is beneath dignity, and no person is beneath love. He said the day he stopped being angry about the toilets was the day he became truly free. She paused, catching her breath. The monitor beeped steadily above them. You remind me of him, she continued. Not the man he became, but the man he was before the toilets. So much pride. So much fear that someone will see you're not as strong as you pretend. So much loneliness hidden under anger. How do you... Richard started, but she squeezed his wrist gently. Because I was that person too once. When I first came here, I was so angry. Angry at God for taking my husband. Angry at this country for being so hard. Angry at my daughter for getting sick. Angry at myself for not being enough. The anger almost destroyed me. But then I remembered what my husband taught me. The work doesn't make the person makes the work holy. Cleaning toilets or cleaning offices or running a company. None of it matters if you forget you're human. If you forget everyone else is human too. Richard felt tears sliding down his face and didn't bother to wipe them away. I forgot, he whispered. I've been so focused on control, on success, on keeping everything in order that I forgot. You forgot what your father taught you, Vera said softly. He looked at her sharply. How did you know about my father? She smiled. You talk in your sleep sometimes when you fall asleep at your desk. You say, sorry, Dad. You say it over and over. I think maybe you've been trying to apologize to him for a very long time. The memory hit him like a wave. His father, in the last months before he died of lung disease, lying in a hospital bed, not unlike this one. Richard had been 28, already climbing the corporate ladder, already missing dinners and family gatherings for work. His father had taken his hand and said, Richie, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget that every person you meet is somebody's son, somebody's father, somebody who matters. Promise me. And Richard had promised. But he'd broken that promise somewhere along the way, buried it under ambition and fear and the desperate need to never be poor or powerless again. I broke my promise, he said to Vera. I became the kind of man he would have been ashamed of. Then make a new promise, Vera said. Not to him, to yourself. Promise to see people again. Promise to remember your humanity and theirs. It's not too late, Mr. Calloway. It's never too late while you're still breathing. Her eyes were starting to close. The nurse appeared in the doorway, giving him a gentle look that said, Time's up. Richard stood, but he didn't let go of Vera's hand. Thank you, he said. For the coffee. For the prayers. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. I don't know how to repay. Love someone else, Vera murmured, her eyes now fully closed. When you see someone invisible, make them visible. That's how you repay me. That's how you keep your father's memory alive. If you've been moved by this story, if you've felt these truths in your own life, please subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this because we believe they matter, because they remind us of who we can be when we choose grace over pride. Vera recovered slowly. The stroke had been mild, the doctors said, and with time and therapy she'd regained most of her strength. But she couldn't work anymore, couldn't push that squeaky cart through the office buildings, couldn't bring coffee to lonely executives. Anna told Richard her grandmother was heartbroken about it. She'd defined herself by her work, by her service, and now that identity was gone. Richard visited Vera every day during her recovery. At first she protested, said he was too busy, but he kept coming. He brought her books in Russian that he'd ordered online. He brought her stories about the office, about changes he was making. He brought her the truth about himself, the failed marriage, the distant daughters, the decades of loneliness he'd buried under work. She listened with that same patient kindness, never judging, always seeing him. 2 months after Vera's stroke, Richard called an all-staff meeting at Calloway Industries. 3,000 employees gathered in the main assembly hall and via video conference, wondering what announcement was coming. Richard stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, factory workers and accountants, salespeople and janitors, executives and security guards. I've been the CEO of this company for 25 years, he began. I've made a lot of money. I've won awards. I've been called successful by every measurable standard. But until 2 months ago, I was failing at the only thing that actually matters. I was failing to see you, not as employees or as numbers on a spreadsheet, but as people, as human beings with stories and struggles and dreams that are just as important as mine. He told them about Vera, Not everything. Her story was hers to share, but enough to make his point. He told them about his blindness, about his cruelty, about how one cleaning lady had taught him what his father had tried to teach him years ago. That dignity isn't found in a job title or a bank account, but in how we treat each other, especially those society tells us are beneath our notice. Effective immediately, Richard continued, we're making changes. Every employee of Callaway Industries, regardless of position, will receive a living wage. We're implementing profit sharing across all levels. We're creating an employee council where everyone has a voice in company decisions. And we're starting a scholarship fund for employees' children and grandchildren, because investing in people is the only investment that truly matters. The room erupted in shocked whispers, then applause. But Richard wasn't finished. I'm also stepping back, he said. I'm staying on as CEO, but I'm cutting my hours in half and my salary by 40%. The money will go into the scholarship fund, and I'm going to spend the time I'm not here reconnecting with my daughters, building relationships I neglected, becoming the father and grandfather I should have been all along. Because Vera Kozlov taught me something crucial. We're not measured by what we build or what we own. We're measured by how well we love, how honestly we see each other, and whether we leave people better than we found them. After the meeting, Richard drove to the modest duplex where Vera lived with Anna. Vera was in the kitchen, moving slowly but steadily, teaching her granddaughter how to make pelmeni the way her mother had taught her. She looked up when Richard entered, flour on her hands, and smiled. Mr. Callaway, you came for dinner? I came to tell you something, he said. I talked to my daughters. Really talked, for the first time in years. They're coming to visit next month. Both of them, with my grandchildren. Kids I barely know because I was too busy, too focused on work that didn't matter. Vera wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes shining. This is good. This is very good. I told them about you, Richard continued. About how you saved me. And they want to meet you, if that's okay. Of course it's okay, Anna interjected, coming to stand beside her grandmother. You're part of our family now, whether you like it or not. And somehow, standing in that small kitchen with these two women who owed him nothing but had given him everything that mattered, Richard finally understood what his father had been trying to teach him. Home wasn't a place. Family wasn't just blood. Wealth wasn't measured in dollars. Everything worth having came down to this: being seen, seeing others, and having the courage to be vulnerable enough to love and be loved in return. 6 months later, on a cool spring evening, Richard stood in the newly renovated community center that Callaway Industries had funded in South Philadelphia. The center offered free job training, ESL classes, and support services for immigrants and refugees. On the wall, a plaque read, "The Vera Kozlov Center for New Beginnings." In honor of a woman who taught us that every person matters, every story deserves to be heard, and it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Vera sat in a place of honor, surrounded by her granddaughter, her friends from the old neighborhood, and Richard's daughters and grandchildren. Richard had asked her to cut the ribbon, but she'd insisted he'd do it with her. So they stood together, the CEO and the cleaning lady, holding the scissors between them. "Ready?" he asked her. She looked at him with those kind, knowing eyes and smiled. "I've been ready since the day I met you, Mr. Callaway. I was just waiting for you to be ready, too." They cut the ribbon together, and the crowd applauded. Later, as people mingled and explored the new center, Richard found himself standing with Vera by the window, watching the neighborhood kids playing in the new playground outside. "Do you remember what you asked me to promise?" he said quietly. "In the hospital, you told me to love someone else, to make the invisible visible." "I remember," Vera said. "Are you keeping that promise?" Richard thought about the changes at the company, about the employees whose names he now knew, whose families he asked about. He thought about his daughters and the relationships they were slowly rebuilding. He thought about this center and the people it would serve. "I'm trying," he said. "Every day I'm trying," Vera patted his hand. "That's all any of us can do. Try today, then wake up tomorrow and try again. That's how we become better. That's how we honor the people who believed in us before we believed in ourselves." As the sun set over Philadelphia, casting golden light through the windows, Richard realized he was no longer the man who'd yelled at a cleaning lady for moving his papers. That man had been trapped in fear and pride, unable to see past his own pain. The man he was now, still imperfect, still learning, but trying, that man was free. Vera had given him that freedom, not through any grand gesture, but through persistent, quiet kindness. Through seeing him when he felt invisible, through loving him when he felt unlovable, through reminding him, day after day, cup of coffee after cup of coffee, that his humanity mattered more than his accomplishments ever would. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of truths you needed to hear, please take a moment to like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to our channel. We're all on this journey together, trying to become a little more human, a little more kind, a little more awake to the people around us. Thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being the kind of person who believes that change is possible, that grace is real, and that it's never, ever too late to come home to who you were always meant to be.